When Pastor and I worked out the Lenten series for this year, the journey to the cross, we didn't realize quite how it was going to play out for us, especially when he asked me on this evening to talk about the surrender of the will of God to the will of God, where the Garden of Gethsemane was concerned. And so for me tonight, dealing with this topic of surrendering to the will of God and linking it with the issue of suffering that's played out in the Garden of Gethsemane is, in a way, a little bit meaningful at this moment. When I wrote this message on Friday, I thought as I would stand before you tonight, I would be between two hospital experiences, Mooresville last week, and then my cancer surgery next week. However, I'm learning to surrender to what is a different plan and to the plan of God. Let me tell you, to go to the ER twice in 24 hours and then to be admitted was not something I choose. I fought against it until I realized that I really didn't have an option. That was surrendering my will. And then to think about the planned surgery next week and all that was involved and all of the adjustments to my life, I realized again, it's not something I wanted until the surgeon called me yesterday and postponed my surgery for another 6 weeks. And I thought, okay now, Lord, what now? I have to surrender to this. So in a way, I understand a little bit of what it means to let go. I'm discovering in life, as I'm sure that you have discovered, that God doesn't need my help and he doesn't need yours. He's well capable of handling things and doing things in the way that is right. And in a way, that's what it means to surrender to the will of God. So I want to suggest to you tonight that will and suffering are often intertwined. Jesus experienced both as his final journey led him to the cross. Accepting, even allowing the will of God where the issue of suffering is concerned is something very difficult. It was difficult for Jesus, and I believe it is difficult for us. Allowing God to do something that we would not choose in the realm of suffering is hard. And this was Jesus' experience here. Throughout his ministry, he often yielded to the will of God, and in the realm of suffering too. And then later on, of course, after this experience, he had the cross experience. But in between his ministry on earth and the cross experience was Gethsemane. So let's talk about Gethsemane for a moment. Can you picture a garden? Well, this was more of an olive grove. In fact, in some scriptures, it is called the Mount of Olives. And yet there were beautiful plants. It was a place that Jesus went to often. Now, being an Englishman, I love a good garden, and I love creating one. There's something about it that is particularly helpful, and I believe that was true for Jesus. You see, Gethsemane had a very special meaning for Jesus. That was why he went there often. Let me suggest to you that I believe, first of all, it was a place of peace and relaxation. That's why in the midst of a busy ministry, he would go there and find a place where he could just go aside, relax, chill out. Gethsemane was that for Jesus. It was also a place of sunlight and beauty, and I've been online and looked at some of the pictures of the then and now, and the sunlight coming through the olive groves and just the beauty of the plants around. You can just imagine he would just feast on the creation of God and just relax and be recharged. And it was, thirdly, a place of spiritual retreat and renewal. He went there often to seek God. So it was very natural on the night before the cross, he would want to go to Gethsemane. But on this night, it was somewhat different to what it had been and was throughout his ministry. On this night, it was dark, of course. He went out into the night from the upper room, we read, and went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And on this night, let me tell you what I believe it was for him. It was, first of all, a place of temptation and torture. He was going to wrestle with the will of God and be tempted maybe even to go another way. And we'll see in a moment that there was real pain in this. For a man to sweat, as it were, drops of blood reveals the torture of the moment. So Gethsemane on this night was a place of temptation and torture. It was also a place of darkness and the presence of the devil. Normally, it was a place of light and he could sense the presence of God. But on this night, it was dark. All he could do was look out into the shadows and imagine the monsters that lay beyond. And the presence of the devil was real because a battle was going to be engaged in this place on that night. But it was also a place where God felt strangely absent, and yet in a way was very close. Isn't it amazing? It's almost a contradiction. Absent, close. There are times in your lives we wonder in my life, where we wonder where God is, and is nearer than we can even imagine him to be. And that was true with the Garden of Gethsemane. I want to just take a moment to pick up my Bible and read Luke's record of this incident. And it's the New Living Bible that I just want to read. And then I want to share with you very quickly one or two thoughts from it. Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went as usual to the Mount of Olives. There he told them, "Pray that you will not give in to temptation." He walked away about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me, yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. At last he stood up again and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not give in to temptation." Now, I looked through Luke's record and I came across 4 very quick subjects that I want to share with you tonight about the garden. First of all, I believe the garden was a place of consolation. Luke says, "And they went as usual," suggesting this was commonplace. Secondly, it was a place of conflict. "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me. I don't want to drink this cup," Matthew records, a place of conflict. Then it was a place of strengthening, a place of comfort, a place of strengthening. An angel strengthened him. And finally, it was a place of conquest. At last, he stood up again, and in Matthew he said, "Let's go." So let's just quickly look at that with regard to the Garden of Gethsemane experience. First of all, it was a place of consolation. Luke says he went as usual. I think I've already shared with you that Gethsemane was a special place for Jesus. Calmness, quiet, where he could pray and spend time with his Father. It was his place. Where's your place? Where's mine? You see, I believe we all need a place where we can meet with God, where we can relax, recharge our spiritual batteries, a place that prepares us for the battles of life. As Paul reminded us in Ephesians 6, we are struggling against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. And if we're going to be able to defeat the enemy and stand up against him, we need an unhurried place, time spent in the presence of God. I will say it again. We all need a place where we can meet with God. Some of you receive the morning devotionals that I put out most days. And you probably look at the time that I put them out. It's usually between 4:30 a.m. and 5 because that's the time I get up. And I love going into my study. And I'm not going to tell you I don't nap because, when you sit in a recliner, that can happen. But it's my place, first thing in the day, for reading my Bible and spending time in the presence of God and preparing myself for the whatever. For Jesus, it was the garden. Preparing himself for the whatever, a place of consolation. I want to suggest to you tonight that all of us need moments that we spend alone with God. Jesus put it this way in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6. But you, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, pray to your Father in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. You need your garden, a place alone with God. Make sure you have that time. As a young Christian, I remember the gentleman that mentored me. And he said, David, one thing you need to establish in your life, and they used to call it the quiet time, a time alone with God. And way back all of those years ago, 60 years ago, I began a pattern that has helped me through my life. Have I always kept it every day? No. We get busy, don't we? But never be too busy for God. This garden was a place of consolation. But secondly, it was a place of conflict. The prayer in verse 42 of Luke 22, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Now, Jesus took his disciples with him from the upper room into the garden. And then he went on his own a little bit, and he took Peter and the sons of Zebedee. But although his disciples were with him, Jesus was very much alone. You know, there are some experiences in life that you and I have to handle on our own. And I believe the battle of the surrender of the will was very much between him, the devil, and God. And only he could handle it. And he had to handle it on his own. It was a wrestling match. You get the sense here in the garden that a tussle of spirit and of will was going on. And that's often what happens with the will. It's never easy to let go. You see, the problem of conflict where our will and the will of God is concerned is that it's my will against his. It's my way or his way. It's what I want or what he wants. And that's often the battle that goes on in our spirit, as it did for Jesus, but it was especially true for Jesus because for Jesus, the battle was the cross that was on the horizon as he knelt there in the garden. When I was writing this, I thought of the story in Genesis 32 and the wrestling between God and Jacob at Peniel. Do you remember what Jacob prayed? I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. I'm not, you must. And do you remember that cost Jacob? When he left that place, he was hobbling on his a deformed hip, because you can never wrestle with the will of God in your life and it not affect you. It will change you. But even that, Jacob and Peniel, was nothing compared to Gethsemane. The intensity of what happened there is expressed only by Luke, and that was the reason why I read Luke 22. It talks about the sweating of great drops of blood. There is a name that it's called, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce it for those of you who are of a medical persuasion here tonight. You know what it is. But there is a phenomenon known where the blood vessels around the sweat glands can rupture under extreme pressure, causing blood to exude from the skin. That shows how intense this was. It was not easy. An intense battle for the surrender of Jesus' will to the will of God was tough. What about in our personal experience? For us to do what God wants us to do, especially when it's the opposite to what we want, is hard. We want God to bless our dreams, our plans, our way. Instead, he wants us to embrace his dreams, follow his plans, and to say yes to God. They are polar opposites, but only the one where I surrender to his dreams, plans, and way for me is going to receive the blessing that he has for me. Like Jesus, I must come to the place where I pray, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Rather than the cup to be taken, he said, I will drink it. Somebody said after Gethsemane, the cross was easy. I don't agree with that. I don't think the cross was ever easy. I don't think it was ever easy for Jesus. But I will say this. After Gethsemane, the cross was possible because there the victory was won. So a place of consolation and a place of strengthening. Then it was a place of comfort. Verse 43, then an angel appeared from heaven and strengthened him. In the midst of the battle, there was this intensity, this darkness. But in the midst of it, God was there. I believe initially God let his son engage in the battle of his own, but he was always in the background, watching through the shadows, holding back, waiting for the moment he could encourage Jesus and minister to him. And I want you to notice it was in the middle of the battle that Luke records these words, an angel came and strengthened him. Now, I'm not sure if you picked up on what I just said, that it was in the midst of the battle. I noticed this, that God didn't take him out of the battle, but strengthened him in the midst of it. Not sure what's going on in your life or my life, what we're encountering, but he doesn't always take us out of it. But he helps us in it and through it. Your battle, the wrestling of your soul, the battle for your will against God is never easy, and you feel alone in it, but you are not. I put in my notes here. God is there, waiting in the shadows, waiting for the moment he can strengthen you. He did not take Jesus away from Gethsemane. He strengthened him in the midst of it. When you feel overwhelmed, defeated, when you feel that the devil has won, hold on. God's coming through. He's never going to leave you alone. And one final thought. The Garden of Gethsemane finally was a place of conquest. Verse 45 of Luke 22. At last he stood up again. I've also put Matthew 26, verse 6 in my notes, where he said, rise, let us go. That suggests to me it was over. The battle was won and the cross was now possible because Jesus surrendered his will to the will of God. That surrender was won on his knees. And when he got up from those knees, there was a new resolve to face the cross. You know as well as I do that when he got up from his knees, the next part of the darkness of Gethsemane began to unfold by the betrayal. But it was in getting up that I believe he achieved this amazing victory. So let me tell you this as I have to conclude. You and I have to face an enemy. The battle of your surrender to the will of God can be a very hard thing, where you let go and let God have everything. The only place where you can ever come to that surrender is on your knees. And you have to stay there until the battle is won. But when you have come to the place where you have honestly said, God, not my will, but your will, then I believe you need to get up. You see, there is the danger of thinking we can simply stay on our knees. No. Do you remember the story of Moses and the burning bush? The bush that burned long enough for Moses to stop and see. Remember what God said to Moses, Exodus 3, verse 5, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. So he had a moment on his knees, surrendering to the will of God. But what did God say to Moses after that? Go, I am sending you. Once you have surrendered to the will of God, it's time to get up off your knees and take the next step. God will give you that courage to do what surrendering to the will of God really means for you. Many years ago now, when I was an 18-year-old teenager, I felt the call of God on my life to go into ministry. The last thing I ever wanted to be was a pastor. And so, for a period of approximately 10 months, I said no to the will of God. And I was not a happy camper during that time because I knew that there was a battle for my soul going on. But I remember one night, approximately 10 months later, getting down beside my bed in my parents' home and just saying, okay, God, I can't run anymore. Here I am. And I remember the way and the journey that God took me from that moment on, going to night school, getting classes to go to college, and all of that fun stuff. I could have stayed on my knees and said, okay, God, I'm willing. And every day told him I'm willing. But I had to do. And the doing has brought me toward the end of the journey and where I am today. Sometimes the place of prayer can be a place of escape. But sometimes it is in the doing, the going, the being, that the conquest is confirmed. Gethsemane was a starting point. Next was the cross. Surrender to the will of God.